Nobody here this morning. Everybody called in cold. That's I told somebody this week I'm from Texas. I like my seasons. You know, I like spring and I like winter and I like fall. I just like them all in the same week. And then the rest of the time summer. That's how we do it in Texas. Welcome. We're glad you're here. We're glad you're joining us, whether you're physically here or digitally here. Welcome. We're glad that you've chosen to be with us this morning. We are in actually lesson 28, believe it or not, of this series where we've just been wandering through the lives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now we are following Joseph. Because while Jacob is still alive, this is the story has kind of taken a detour into Egypt. And last time we talked about Joseph and his journey, how he was sold by his brothers, and then those people carried him down to Egypt, where he was sold again to the captain of the guard. The captain of the guard, Potiphar, Joseph ends up rising in the ranks until he is the administrator of Potiphar's household, which is pretty much the highest you can get as a slave. And then, of course, you remember the story where he is propositioned by Potiphar's wife. He turns her down, but she, in turn, accuses him. He is thrown into the dungeon. As he is in the dungeon, two other political prisoners, the king's cupbearer and the king's baker, are put in prison with him. And in that time, they have dreams, and Joseph interprets their dreams. One is going to be restored to his position, and one is going to be hanged. And those interpretations do come true. And the cupbearer is restored to his position. And as he's leaving, he tells Joseph, "I'm going to remember you. Don't worry about it. Everything's going to be okay." And then he's gone. And 2 years have passed. 2 years have passed since that time. Joseph sitting in jail, wondering what's going to happen. What's happening next? Where is this guy? What happened to the promises that he made to me? And a lot of times, you know, you've seen people who are what they call an overnight sensation, right? And these people just became an overnight sensation, this band or singer or actor or whatever. And then in reality, when they talk about it or they're interviewed, it was a long, arduous process. That's what happens to Joseph. It looks like now he's going to just be, bam, elevated overnight. We know from the story this has been a long road. And it's easy to misunderstand Genesis 41 by putting this idea of a lucky break, you know, that you hear people talk about. It's very easy for us to put that on here, that Genesis 41 is Joseph's lucky break. But the point of the narrative here is that there's no such thing. You know, I like to say to people, I don't believe in luck, because I don't think there is luck. I think God is at work and things happen, and sometimes I don't understand why they're happening, but I don't believe it's now, I think things happen by time and chance, and that's not, you know, I'm not saying everything is God's direct hand, but I do think God causes all things to work together for good, for those who love the Lord. So he is exalted to the second highest position in Egypt. And Genesis doesn't tell us the whole story, but it does provide us with a vantage point where we're looking at these events that led up to this point. And so it's not It's not a Joseph was promoted and we all lived happily ever after. There's some things that have to happen. We can all, if we're honest, look back and see God's fingerprints on our lives, right? If I ask you to share that, every single one of us has some kind of story where we can look back and see God's fingerprints on something that happened to us. But in the moment, we usually don't see that, right? I mean, we usually don't get, why are these things happening? And it's real easy for us to ask those, why God? Why is this happening? And then there are some things that we may never understand. And we have to accept that on faith. I mean, that's pretty much the whole point of Job. We talked about that last time, that Job says, God, I want you to come down here and explain yourself to me. And God says, you know, when you can make a whale, then you get to ask questions. Until then, you need to just be quiet. And I think we have to, at some point, faith means trusting that God is God and he can do his job better than I can. We can all look back and see God's fingerprints on our lives, and we all have those stories. That's what we're looking at here in Genesis 41. This whole story has been leading to this moment. If you have your Bibles, we're going to start in verse 1 of Genesis 41. It happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream. And behold, he was standing by the Nile, and lo, from the Nile there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed in the marsh grass. And behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile, ugly and gaunt, and they stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek and fat cows. Then Pharaoh awoke. And he fell asleep and dreamed a second time, and behold, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, plump and good. Then behold, 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Now it came about in the morning that his spirit was troubled, so he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. So let's stop right there. 2 full years have passed. Joseph's still in Potiphar's prison and forgotten by the cupbearer despite his favorable interpretation of the cupbearer's dream. And so as this is all happening, God is still at work. God gives Pharaoh these 2 dreams. Now that's significant because that sometimes we get the idea that God is only working through the righteous. That God can't work through other means. Pharaoh is a pagan. He's worshiping the river and all the Egyptian gods, yet God is still working through him. How is that possible? How is it that God can still speak through this guy who, if you ask him, would say he doesn't even believe in Yahweh? He is the creator. He's absolutely. And he's God, and he's God overall, and so it's not a big deal for him to be able to speak through Pharaoh. I think that's significant because do you remember a few years ago when we had there was big discussion and argument, debate, whatever, as Christians were struggling with who to vote for because you had 2 candidates. And regardless of what they said, neither one of them appeared very Christian. I mean, let's be honest. And as a Christian, you're trying to figure out who to vote for. And you've been around politics enough to know that whatever they tell you doesn't matter. What they do is what matters. And neither one of them seem to exemplify a very Christ-like lifestyle. So who do you vote for? Well, I think at some point things like this come into play. That God is God, And God can work through who God can work through. He can work through whoever he wants to. And it doesn't matter to him whether it's a pagan like Pharaoh who is worshiping false gods, or whether it's a righteous man like Joseph. He's still working and working about doing what he set out to do. Tim? Absolutely. Tim said, as we've seen going through this series, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, they're not always godly people. They're not always righteous, but yet God still works through them. In fact, God's still faithful to them because of himself more than because of them. And I think that's significant too, because it's important for us to see that God is not constrained by anything. It's interesting because these dreams are remarkably Egyptian. That they're very tailored to Pharaoh so that it would be something that would speak to him. The cows come out of the Nile. The grain is being withered by the dreaded east wind that the Egyptians would talk about. The sight of the cows cooling themselves in the river. This was a normal thing. And so all these things are very Egyptian. The dream was distressing to Pharaoh because he gets the message. You know, you and I, we have dreams, right? And sometimes we don't remember them. Sometimes we do. Sometimes you wake up and you think, man, what was that about? Or I shouldn't have had that Mexican food that late. Or what, you know, I mean, whatever it is, there's something that what's going on that's crazy. But when you have the same basic dream twice in a row, right? Now you start to go, okay, what's up here? Because this is the same thing happening, the 7 and the 7 and then the 7 eat the 7, and there's something here. And so Pharaoh is struggling with this because there's something here. I don't know whether Pharaoh is still a religious man, even though he's not worshiping God. He would have been thinking that some of the Egyptian gods were sending him this or trying to speak to him. And so he does what he would have normally done. He calls his usual source of information, the magicians. And you know, when we think of magicians, we're the guy in the black tuxedo pulling rabbits out of hats. That's not what this is. Think more like wizards, right? Sorcerers, religious shamans, priests, whatever you want to call them. These were the guys who were the wise men, right? And they had the direct line to the Egyptian gods. And so they would be the ones who should give the interpretation. They should be the ones who were the wisest and best educated of Pharaoh's people. And their job, one of their jobs was to interpret dreams and to give direction for visions and things like that. And I think that's important because their inability to interpret these dreams, because they weren't anything that they could understand. Because the things of God are not always readily understandable by those who are outside of God. Does that make sense? And so that's why God's still speaking to these people, but they don't understand it because the things of God don't always make sense to those outside of faith. I mean, Paul says this in the New Testament, right? The cross is foolishness. That you know, we understand it, but sometimes those outside, it doesn't make a lick of sense. It's crazy, and they can't wrap their brain around it. And that's what's happening here. And so in this moment, the cupbearer has that light come on, right? He is. Oh yeah. yeah, you know what? This reminds me of a time when I had a dream. And let's pick it up in verse 9. Then the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I would make mention today of my own offenses. Pharaoh was furious with his servants and put me in confinement in the house of the captain of the bodyguard, both me and the chief baker. And we had a dream on the same night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now a Hebrew youth was with us there, a servant of the captain of the bodyguard, and we related them to him, and he interpreted our dreams to us, or for us. To each one he interpreted according to his own dream, and it came about that just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, but he hanged him. So it's interesting here because this cupbearer has the light come on. Oh, yeah, this reminds me of a time, and, he kind of glosses over, this reminds me of a time when you were mad at all your servants. He throws everybody in there. Remember that time? And it wasn't just something that I did. You were mad at everybody, and you put me and the chief baker. We were, again, in the house of Potiphar. In Potiphar's jail. He doesn't talk about, there was a Hebrew youth there. The Bible's going to tell us in just a few verses that Joseph is 30 years old when he stands before Pharaoh. So the cupbearer is like some of us who are a little bit older, When you get a little bit older, everybody's a kid. and you start looking at I'll still talk about the college kids because they think they're young adults, but I still think they're kids. And they still look like kids, and I tell Hunter he's a kid all the time. Even he's a professional and graduated, and so but you get it. And so the Hebrew youth was there, but this kid was there. Well, he wasn't a kid. He was 28 years old. He doesn't mention Joseph's offenses or his innocence. He doesn't go into any of that with Pharaoh. He just says, this guy was able to interpret my dream, and his interpretation proved correct. Because in that moment, nobody cares. Nobody's worried about whether Joseph is guilty or innocent. Nobody's worried about whether he's wrongly imprisoned. None of that matters. What matters to Pharaoh is interpreting this dream. And in that moment, that's all he cares about. And he says, look, there was a kid, and he interpreted my dream, and it was right. And so, verse 14, then Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, but no one can interpret it. And I've heard it said about you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph then answered Pharaoh, saying, it's not me. It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. So Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, in my dream, behold, I was standing on the bank of the Nile. Behold, 7 cows, fat and sleek, came up out of the Nile. And they grazed in the marsh grass, and lo, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such as I had never seen for ugliness in all the land of Egypt. And the lean and ugly cows ate up the first 7 fat cows. Yet when they had devoured them, it could not be detected that they had devoured them, for they were just as ugly as before. Then I awoke. I also saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears, full and good, came up on a single stalk, and lo, 7 ears, withered, thin, and scorched by the east wind, sprouted up after them. And the thin ears swallowed the 7 good ears. Then I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. So Joseph is hurriedly brought up. Now you read this and you go, wait a minute. They hurriedly brought him, but they stopped and shaved him first. What? We're in a hurry. Well, this is a cultural thing. To Jews, a beard was a symbol of wisdom. And you still see some of the Jews today that have the Orthodox Jews that have the longer the beard, the more wisdom you had. And that was a symbol of honor. It was a symbol of respect. The Egyptians, on the other hand, saw any kind of facial hair as offensive. You were barbaric. You were unkempt. You weren't civilized. And so Joseph is hurriedly taken out of prison, but that's why they stop and clean him up and shave him and put some better clothes on him before they bring him before Pharaoh. You know, I've heard people drag sermons out of that. I think that's going a little bit too far. But he did come before Pharaoh. That's why, if you read that and you go, why, that doesn't make sense. It's interesting here because as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, if Joseph's dad had been in this situation, if Jacob had been in this situation at Joseph's age, how would this conversation have gone different? Think about it. Well, Jacob is before Pharaoh, and he has the ability to interpret Pharaoh's dream, and he's going to say, well, now, Pharaoh, I might be able to interpret this for you, but I'm going to need to be released from prison, and probably I'm going to need some money and some safe transport. You know, that's what Jacob's the trickster. That's every time he was in a position. He was making deals, and you know, Joseph doesn't do any of that. He's just, Joseph is just straight up all the time. I told you before when they the cupbearer and the baker ask him about the dreams, and he goes, well, don't interpretations belong to God? I don't think he's being arrogant. I don't think he's being in any way superior. I think he's just stating the facts. God gave you the dreams, you know, let's ask God what the reason is. And I don't think he sees it. I think we're going to see it throughout this exchange. He's not trying to get anything. He's just answering Pharaoh's questions. Pharaoh says, oh, you have the ability to interpret dreams. And Joseph says, no, it's not me. I don't do it, but we can ask God because God's the one that's responsible for the dreams. I mean, I like Joseph is just, you know, he's just matter of fact. He's not trying to, you know, play it off. He's not trying to get something out of this. He's not trying to promote himself. Because I can just see Jacob, man. He would just be, you know, I would love to help you, but I just can't focus because of the circumstances that I'm in. You know, I mean, you can see that. Jacob would have. Anyway, I'm sorry. So, he goes before Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, I hear you have the ability to interpret dreams. And verse 25. Now Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one and the same. And the 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 thin ears scorched by the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. It is as I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he's about to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming into all the land of Egypt, and after them 7 years of famine will come. And all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will ravage the land. So the abundance will be unknown in the land because of that subsequent famine, for it will be very severe. Now, as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter is determined by God, and God will quickly bring it about. And now let Pharaoh look for a man, discerning and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land, and let him exact 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years of abundance. Then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming, and store up the grain for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it, and let the food become as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine which will occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish during the famine. So Joseph doesn't just interpret the dream. He doesn't just leave it at that. And again, I don't think this is Joseph, and this is just my opinion. I don't think Joseph is being arrogant or trying to jockey for position. I think Joseph is just calling it as he sees it. He says, look, this is what the dreams mean. God's telling you that he's about to do this thing. He's about to give you 7 good years, and then there's going to be a really severe famine. And that famine's going to sweep through, and everybody's going to forget the good years because it's going to be bad. And he's giving it to you twice because he's telling you he's already decided he's going to do this. This is going to happen. And so, but he doesn't just stop there. He could have just stopped there. And everything would have been fine because he answered the question. But he doesn't, because I just think that's who he is. He just has this, he's like, you know, what I would do if I were you is I'd find somebody to put over this. and find somebody who can manage this thing, and you give them the authority to tax the produce that's going to come out of this good years and hide that so that when the bad years come, you're taken care of. I think Joseph that's just the way his mind works. That's how he got promoted to a lot of these things. I think he just sees things, and you know people like this, right? They can just see something and see the system. And that's why some people are great managers and great CEOs and great, and there are your people who just see a system and they look at it and they go, oh, well, yeah, you need to do this, 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 and this, and this. And then there are other people who, they're I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. And Pharaoh hears this, and the two dreams are the same. These were that you need a capable administrator. You need somebody who can take care of this and be responsible for all this. And I don't think Joseph is talking about himself. I think he's just saying you need to put somebody over this. I really don't. Bible doesn't tell us either way, so this is Jeff's opinion. Take that for what it's worth. Not much. But I don't think he's trying to jockey for position. I think he's just calling it the way he sees it, that there needs to be somebody over this, and if you do this now, you'll make it through this, but this is how I would handle it. And Pharaoh likes it. Verse 37. The proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his servants. Then Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this, in whom is a divine spirit? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has informed you of all this, there's no one so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and according to your command, all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne I will be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put the gold necklace around his neck, and he had him ride in his second chariot. And they proclaimed before him, bow the knee. And he set him over all the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission, no one shall raise his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh named Joseph Zephanath-Paneah, and he gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On, as his wife. And Joseph went forth over the land of Egypt. So he hears this and he goes, well, yeah, that makes sense. And he looks at his magicians and the people around him and he goes, can we find anybody better than this? I mean, this guy's got the divine spirit on him. And I think it's significant here, and this is something I want us to stop and look at for a second. Joseph never preaches to Pharaoh. He doesn't. Joseph never preaches to Pharaoh, yet Pharaoh sees God at work in him. Pharaoh says, since God has informed you of all this, then you're going to be over my house. Now, Pharaoh doesn't believe in Joseph's God. But he sees something in him, and there is a divine spirit on him. And while I may not be under this God, whatever God he's under, we're going to listen to. How can that influence us today? I think there's something there. Because we've in America gotten to this culture of almost vocational righteousness is what I'll call it. That churches have a minister for everything, and that our consumer culture, we show up and we get stuff given to us and we take and then we pay somebody to go do the work of the church. Now, not this church. We don't do that. I'm not complaining, so don't hear me say that. I'm saying church culture as a whole in America. And I think there's something here because in our daily lives, we're all going to be put in positions where we can speak the power of God into that situation. Not preaching. Joseph is not preaching. Joseph does not say, this is not, lo, you pagan worshipers. You know what I'm saying? You're worshiping all these false gods. He doesn't do any of that. He doesn't come in and tell them how crazy they are for worshiping the river or the sun. He doesn't come in and tell them how Ra and all these are false gods. He just says, this is what God says. And my God's going to do this. And it comes to pass, and that speaks louder than any sermon he could have offered in that moment. I think there's something there for us, for humans, Americans today, because our culture is increasingly becoming more and more pagan. And church's response has been to scream and yell and point fingers. Well, you people are all going to hell because you're not doing it right. And that's not working. Nobody has ever went, oh man, you're right. I need to repent. We just offend people and push them away. I think if we were more like Joseph and speaking God, Joseph doesn't in any way diminish God. He doesn't in any way bow to the Egyptian gods. He doesn't in any way sell himself out. But as he's talking to this pagan king in this pagan culture, he brings in the power of God and demonstrates that in such a way that Pharaoh even acknowledges there's something in this kid. There's some kind of divine spirit in this kid. I think there's something there. When we go to work, when we go to the grocery store, when we go to, one of the things that will drive me crazy, if you've ever worked in food service. Anybody, you ever work in food service? You know what I'm talking about? Christians have the worst reputation among wait staff because we are the most demanding, we tip the least, and we're the rudest. I'm not kidding. Go ask any of them. Go ask any of them. Most waiters and waitresses will tell you they'd rather work the bar on Saturday night than the dining room on Sunday morning. That's sad, y'all. It shouldn't be that way. It should not be that we come out of here and then just toss everything aside and are worse than the pagans. You know what I'm saying? We need to be the ones bringing God into a situation. And I'm not talking about the people that leave the fake dollar bill that says God loves you. That doesn't help her pay her bills. You know what I'm saying? But being the one who speaks love into a situation. When we went into a restaurant this weekend, and when we walked in, the lady who was the hostess, who was also working the bar, who was also waitressing, she said, we're short-staffed tonight because a bunch of our staff's sick. You're going to have to be patient with us. Okay. And we went and sat down, and so when she came to us, I said, here's the drink order, here's the appetizer order, here's the entree order. And she's like, wow, you're ready. And we just went, no, we can see you're busy. And so you get all that done and you can go take care of other people. She gushed over us all night. Y'all are so sweet. I'm being sweet. If I was in your shoes, that's what I'd want. And instead of, there were people sitting around us who were getting all bent out of shape and twisted up and yelling and acting a fool because their food didn't come out as fast as they thought it should. And it's just like, how is that showing Christ to the world? It's not. And it's just, anyway, sorry, that sermon was free. What's that? Yeah, that's pretty good advice, right, Jason? Jason said doing to others as you would have them doing to you. And think about in your job, and some of you are retired, so think about in your daily interactions. There's somewhere that you go regularly where they know you, right? And there's an opportunity for you to speak God into that situation. I don't know what it is, but you do. And there's an opportunity, whether it's the physical therapist you go to, or whether it's the nurse that sees you on a regular basis, or whether it's the grocery store clerk that you go to because you have your favorite meat market. I don't know. Everybody's got a thing. You've got somewhere that you're a regular. I think we have an opportunity to speak God into those situations and to speak Jesus into those situations, just like Joseph does right here. Joseph doesn't ask for a release from prison. He doesn't ask for an elevation of position. He doesn't ask for anything, but he gets everything. Just as Joseph was once second only to Potiphar in his house, now he is second only to Pharaoh in the country. And this is the way my mind works again, but y'all are going to have to bear with me. But I wonder how much that burned up Potiphar or Potiphar's wife. You know, because now this guy who was in your jail last week, you're being told to bow to. Literally, bow the knee. You're being told to bow to. Man, I just got to feel like that couldn't have gone over well, but what are you going to do? Pharaoh took some highly symbolic actions here when he gives him the signet ring and the gold necklace, and there's some things there that are showing Pharaoh bestowing his power onto Joseph, that he is giving him this authority. It's a big deal. It's more than just dressing him up with some jewelry. And so that everybody then that saw him would see that he was not a mere Hebrew, because, you know, the Bible's going to tell us later that their Hebrews are hated by the Egyptians. He's not just a mere Hebrew. He is now Pharaoh's right-hand man. And he makes him an honorary Egyptian, right? He changes his name to an Egyptian name. He gives him an Egyptian wife and makes him an honorary Egyptian. Now, I've heard some people have problems with this, that Joseph took a wife from among the Egyptians, and therefore that was him doing something that was outside of the will of God. I don't buy that, because Joseph is held up as a very righteous individual, and if you look at it practically, where would Joseph go to find a godly wife? You know? I mean, to the brothers who sold him into slavery, or to his Uncle Laban? You know? I mean, where are you going to find a godly wife? Well, you're not. And so I think there's something there. I also think that you have to remember, this is pre-law. God has not given any commands about that we know of to this point. There's not any written that God gives regarding marriage outside of anything. And even when he does, in Deuteronomy, for example, he forbids Canaanite wives. It's not forbidden that. The bottom line is that the kind of guy who would say no to Potiphar's wife would not take a wife that was going to corrupt him. Does that make sense? And so I don't buy that this was in some way wrong or sinful on Joseph's part. So the final section shows the accuracy of Joseph's interpretation. It shows his administrative skills in handling, and it also reveals that Joseph continues to be faithful spiritually. Pick it up in verse 46. Now Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. And during the 7 years of plenty, the land brought forth abundantly. So he gathered all the food of these 7 years which occurred in the land of Egypt, and placed the food in the cities. He placed in every city the food from its own surrounding fields. Thus Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he stopped measuring it, for it was beyond measure. Now before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore to him. And Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for, he said, God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. And he named the second Ephraim, for, he said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. When the 7 years of plenty which had been in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, just as Joseph had said, then there was famine in all of the lands. But in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried out to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph. Whatever he says to you, you shall do." When the famine was spread over all the face of the earth, then Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. And the famine was severe in the land of Egypt, and all the people of all the earth came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe in all the earth. So Joseph, it basically comes to pass just like he said it would. There's going to be 7 years of good, 7 years of bad. You need to store up all this stuff. Joseph, he hits the ground running. Pharaoh says, "Look, you're in charge," and the Bible says he just started doing it. And he went through and he put this plan into practice that he had told Pharaoh about, and lo and behold, it becomes very prosperous, both in the times of good and in the time of bad. He has the names of his children give us some indication of Joseph's spiritual condition. Manasseh means making to forget. And this is Joseph's expression of gratitude towards God, that he is now blessed, and his blessings have caused him to forget all the hardships that he's gone through up until this point. And I don't think this is in a negative way. I don't think he's in any way saying this vindictively towards his family, and I base that on the way he acts towards them when he encounters them later. I think it's just that he's let it go. He's moved on. It's done. I'm not holding on to a grudge or a hurt. I think that's important, because that's we all know how that can eat us up. But anyway, there he is. And so it's interesting that we get to this point and we see that God didn't will or plan or decree that Joseph be thrown in a well. Right? God didn't direct his brothers to sell him into slavery. Yet he got to this point because he's going to save the chosen people of God. Because if he would have gone back to Canaan, if he would have somehow, his brothers had a change of heart and they would have come and rescued him from the Midianites and taken him back, I don't know that he would have been the deliverer of the household of Israel, and those who were. But also, if you go back, we're in chapter 41. Go back to chapter 15. God says to Abram, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that's not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions." Wow. So way back in chapter 15, God's saying that this is going to happen. It's coming. Because, again, I don't think God decrees that it's going to work out this way. And so how do we balance this? How do we balance this? This is the last thing I want us to leave with as we're running out of time. But how do we balance this idea that God causes all things to work together for good with the fact that a lot of bad things had to happen to get to this point? So does this teach us theologically that God somehow causes bad things to happen to good people to improve his purposes? Okay. Steve says he doesn't cause it, but he lets it happen. Right. Okay. I'm sorry, folks at home. I'm not gonna be able to recap all that. Melissa. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Melissa said, for those of you at home, hey, God gives us free will. And by giving us free will, it enables a lot of these things to happen because his brothers made this choice. This was a choice that they made and happened to him. And if we've learned nothing else going through this series, we see that God says way back here to Abram, this is what I'm going to do through you. And then from that point, from Genesis 12 all the way through the book of Manasseh, the descendants of Abram try to mess that up. I mean, that's pretty much the story. And they find way after way after way of trying to mess up God's plan. And God keeps going, that's okay. Not a big deal. You do what you're going to do because I'm still going to make this end up where I want it to end up. And I think that's exactly right. I think that's what it means. It doesn't say God causes all things to be good, right? It says God causes all things to what? Work together for the good of those. And so, not that if you're a believer, everything's going to be good. But if you're a believer, God's plan is still, Pharaoh, if you're not a believer, God's plan's still going to be. I know, that's true. Don't get me off on that. Don't get me off on that. Y'all know that's one of my pet peeves. You'll get me off on a rant, and that's not conducive for any of us because we're running out of time. I think that's absolutely correct. That if we learn nothing else from this story, as well as the broader stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we've learned that God's plan is God's plan. And try as we might, God doesn't need me for his plan to be successful, nor can I mess it up. I think that's both encouraging and humbling at the same time, So anyway, we're going to leave that at there. We're out of time. You have about 12 minutes till we're going to be back in here for worship. So go do what you need to do, and we'll be back in here in just a minute. Those of you who are online, we're going to cut the feed, and then you can pick it back up in just a little bit. So see you back here in just a minute.